Did you know that signs of dementia can show up a year before diagnosis and most families miss them? It's not always about forgetting names or getting lost, like most people think. Often, it starts with subtle behaviors, especially when they come and go. In this video, we're going to look at 5 signs older adults often show about a year before dementia sets in and why paying attention to these early signals can make all the difference. Whether you're watching this for yourself, your spouse, or someone you care about, understanding these patterns can help you respond earlier, plan better, and preserve more independence in the long run. Stay with me until the end, because we're not just listing symptoms. You'll learn what each sign really means, how it connects to brain changes, and how to gently support someone who may be showing them. These signs don't always mean dementia is guaranteed, but they do mean it's time to pay closer attention. And if you've ever noticed a loved one doing things that didn't feel quite right, this video may help you finally connect the dots. Let's begin. Sign 1. Frequent memory slips in familiar routines. One of the most common and easily missed early signs of dementia is when someone starts forgetting parts of their everyday routine repeatedly and in ways that don't quite match their old self. We all misplace our keys or forget an appointment now and then, but when it becomes more frequent, more noticeable, and starts interfering with daily life, it's often not just normal aging. It may be the brain signaling something deeper. These memory lapses aren't always dramatic. In fact, they can be incredibly subtle. A person might leave the stove on after making coffee or forget they already fed the dog and do it again. They might begin asking the same question over and over, even after getting a clear answer. What makes this behavior concerning isn't the mistake itself. It's the pattern. When the same types of lapses start happening regularly, especially in situations where the person used to be sharp and attentive, it's worth taking note. Take, for example, a man named Walter, 75, who had always been organized and dependable. But over several months, his wife began noticing that he was double paying bills, misplacing tools in odd places, and getting frustrated when he couldn't remember why he walked into a room. At first, she brushed it off. He's just tired, she thought, but it kept happening, and the look on his face told her he knew something was changing too. The psychology behind this change is important to understand. In the early stages of dementia, the hippocampus, the part of the brain that helps us form and retrieve recent memories, starts to weaken. This makes it harder for the brain to store short-term information or recall it at the right moment. And since memory is something we rely on without thinking, these gaps feel jarring, not just to those around us, but to the person experiencing them. What often makes a sign so hard to catch is that it doesn't always show up in a doctor's office. Memory tests done in a quiet room for a few minutes don't always reflect what happens during a busy, distracted day at home. That's why the people who live with someone or speak with them every day are usually the first to notice these changes. And yet, because the signs are subtle and inconsistent, they're often dismissed as normal forgetfulness. But here's the key. It's the pattern, not the one-time slip, that matters. When someone starts forgetting familiar steps in a task they've done for years, or they seem more disoriented by minor changes in routine, it's time to slow down and take a closer look. That quiet awareness, without panic, is one of the most loving things you can offer. Recognizing this kind of memory change early on isn't just about preparing for what might come. It's about supporting the person as they are now, helping them feel safe, understood, and not alone in what they're experiencing. Because behind every forgotten task is a real human moment, someone trying their best and needing a little more grace than they did before. Sign 2, trouble finding words or finishing thoughts. When someone begins struggling to find the right words in everyday conversation, it's often more than just a moment of distraction. For many older adults, this is one of the early quiet signs that dementia may be developing beneath the surface. It doesn't always show up as total silence. Sometimes the person keeps talking, but their sentences feel scattered, with words that don't quite fit or pauses that grow longer and more frequent. This shift can show up in subtle ways. A person might call everyday items by the wrong name, like saying hand clock instead of watch, or pointing to the refrigerator and calling it that food thing. Or they might begin repeating the same word or phrase because they can't recall the next part of what they wanted to say. In group settings, they may seem quieter than usual, not because they have nothing to share, but because they're trying to avoid the embarrassment of losing track mid-sentence. I remember a man named Tom, 78, who used to be the center of every conversation. He was quick with a story and always had the perfect words to describe even the smallest detail. But his daughter began noticing he was using vague terms like thing, that place, or far more than before. And when she'd ask follow-up questions, he'd sometimes go silent, as if the thread of the story had just vanished. She said it felt like watching someone walk through fog. Still there, but not quite reaching the point. What's happening in the brain during these moments is tied to how dementia affects the language centers, particularly in the left side of the brain. Word retrieval becomes harder, and forming sentences can feel like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. It's deeply frustrating for the person going through it because they often know what they want to say. It's just that the words aren't arriving when they need them. And here's something many people don't realize. This communication difficulty can lead to withdrawal. When someone keeps struggling to express themselves, they may start avoiding conversations altogether. They might pull away from family gatherings, talk less on the phone, or stop engaging in hobbies that used to involve discussion or storytelling. This silence isn't always about mood or preference. It's often a quiet form of self-protection. That's why it's so important to pay attention to how someone speaks, not just what they say. Are they slower to respond than they used to be? Do they use filler words more often? Are their stories less organized? Or do they trail off without resolution? These signs matter, not because they're a guaranteed diagnosis, but because they signal that something in the brain's processing may be changing. If you're still watching this video and finding these insights valuable, please comment number 2 below to let me know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any videos. Your support helps us continue creating good content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's move forward. Sign 3. Disorientation with time or familiar places. One of the more unsettling signs that often begins showing up about a year before a dementia diagnosis is a quiet but growing confusion about time, place, or sequence of events. It might not be dramatic at first. It's not always someone getting completely lost or forgetting their own address. Sometimes it starts with small mix-ups, like thinking it's morning when it's already evening, or asking if it's Sunday 3 or 4 times in a day. These slips might seem harmless at first. A person may start getting dressed for an appointment that already happened yesterday, or insist a visitor came by earlier, even though no one did. Or they might suddenly feel unsure about how to get to a grocery store they've been driving to for years. It's not that they don't recognize the place, it's that the sequence, the flow, the orientation inside, their mind has shifted. And for the person experiencing it, this can bring waves of confusion, even panic. I once knew a woman named Carol, who was 81 and had lived in the same house for over 3 decades. One afternoon, she went outside to water her plants and then suddenly called her neighbor in tears, saying she didn't know how to get back inside. She was standing right at her own front door. Her neighbor described it like this: she knew where she was. She just couldn't make it connect to what she was supposed to do next. That sense of spatial disconnection is often one of the earliest brain-based changes we see in dementia. At the heart of this symptom is a disruption in how the brain organizes context, what day it is, what part of the day we're in, what usually comes next. The brain's internal calendar, the one we all rely on without thinking, begins to fray. And when that happens, people can feel lost even in familiar places or unsure even in predictable routines. The fear that comes with that uncertainty often leads to frustration or even anger, as the person struggles to make sense of a world that suddenly feels off. These moments of disorientation can also be masked. A person might pretend they remember where they are or what's happening and laugh it off to avoid embarrassment. They might change the subject or insist, with more energy than usual, that they're just fine. But if you know them well, you can often sense that something is different, that their confidence in space and time isn't as strong as it used to be. That's why it's important not to dismiss these moments too quickly. If someone starts confusing the time of day, forgets how they got somewhere, or seems unusually unsure about a familiar route, take note. These aren't always one-off slip-ups. They can be quiet signals that the mind's internal compass is shifting, and that it might be time to gently open a conversation or seek guidance from someone who understands what early dementia can look like. And just as important, don't meet that confusion with criticism or correction. Meet it with patience, with calm, because what someone needs most in those disoriented moments is not to be reminded of what they forgot, but to feel safe, grounded, and unjudged as they try to find their way back. Sign 4. Withdrawal from social. Activities or favorite hobbies. When someone who used to enjoy social gatherings, regular phone calls, or hobbies they were passionate about starts quietly stepping back from those things, it may be more than just a change in mood or energy. Often, this kind of withdrawal is one of the clearest signs that something deeper is happening in the brain, and it tends to show up long before any official diagnosis is made. You might see the shift unfold slowly. A person who once loved church potlucks or Tuesday bridge night begins to decline invitations with vague excuses. Someone who used to read novels starts leaving books unfinished. The person who always chatted on the phone suddenly lets it ring and doesn't call back. These may seem like personal choices, and in some cases they are. But when that retreat becomes a pattern, especially from things that used to bring joy, it's time to look more closely. I remember a woman named Joyce, 76, who had always been active in her local garden club. She was the one who reminded others about meetings and planned the spring events. But one year, she simply stopped showing up. When her friends checked in, she said she'd just been tired or too busy, but the truth was, she had started feeling overwhelmed during conversations. She couldn't follow them as easily and worried she might say something off, rather than risk the discomfort. She pulled away. What's often happening underneath the surface is a growing self-awareness that something isn't quite right. A person may notice they're forgetting things more often or struggling to follow the flow of group conversations. They might feel embarrassed when they forget a name or repeat a story. And instead of asking for help, they withdraw to avoid feeling exposed. This isn't about laziness or even depression. It's a quiet self-protection mechanism against the anxiety of slipping up in front of others. Psychologically, this behavior connects to early disruptions in attention, memory, and language processing. When these abilities begin to decline even slightly, being around others can start to feel mentally exhausting. The brain's normal rhythm for back-and-forth interaction becomes harder to maintain. And when someone senses this, even if they can't explain it, they start to avoid the settings that challenge them. This is why it's so important to notice when someone begins to shrink their social world. If they're pulling away from routines they once loved, especially those that involve conversation or creativity, don't assume it's just getting older. It may be a quiet signal that their brain is having to work harder than it used to, and they're feeling that strain more than they're saying. And when you notice it, respond with gentleness. Instead of pushing someone back into old routines, invite them in simpler ways. Make the environment feel safe and low pressure. Let them know they're valued, even if they're quieter, even if they forget something, because deep down, they may not be losing interest at all. They may just be losing confidence. If you're still watching this video and finding these insights valuable, please comment number 4 below to let me know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any videos. Your support helps us continue creating good content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's move forward. Sign 5. Subtle changes in judgment or decision-making. When a person begins making small but unusual choices in their daily life, choices that feel out of character or surprisingly careless, it can be an early sign that their ability to reason and evaluate situations is starting to decline. These shifts in judgment often appear a year or more before a diagnosis of dementia, and tend to show up in ways that seem harmless at first, but become harder to ignore over time. It might look like wearing a winter coat on a warm day, or leaving the front door wide open for hours without realizing it. Or maybe they start falling for obvious phone scams, signing up for questionable services, or giving away money without a clear reason. These aren't just bad decisions. They're decisions that don't line up with how the person used to think, act, or protect themselves. I knew a man named Eugene, 82, who had always been sharp with money, a careful budgeter who never laid on a bill. But one day, his daughter found he had given hundreds of dollars to a stranger who knocked on the door claiming they were collecting for a neighborhood repair fund. There was no such fund. When she asked why he gave the money, he simply said he seemed trustworthy. That kind of shift in judgment, simple, sincere, but disconnected from common sense, is a red flag many families face. In the brain, this change ties to how dementia affects the frontal lobe areas responsible for planning, evaluating risk, and making decisions. When these parts start to break down, a person may not notice when something feels off. Their internal red flags, the gut feelings that usually protect us, go quiet. And without those signals, even intelligent, thoughtful people can start making choices that don't reflect who they've always been. Sometimes it's not financial. It could be food, eating expired items without noticing or leaving perishable things on the counter for days. It could be hygiene, bathing far less often, wearing the same clothes for days, or forgetting to use soap. Or it could be in social settings, oversharing personal details with strangers or making comments they would never have said out loud before. These aren't signs of someone trying to misbehave. They are signs that the filter, the thoughtful pause between impulse and action, is beginning to wear thin. What makes this sign particularly hard is that it can come and go. A person might make a poor choice one day and seem completely like themselves the next. But that inconsistency is part of what makes it worth watching. If you start to see decisions that feel off, that don't line up with the person you know, not once, but a few times, it may be time to look beneath the surface. And just as importantly, approach with care. No one wants to feel scolded or judged, especially when they're already confused. Instead of saying, "Why did you do that?" Try something softer like, "Let's look at this together." Because deep down, most people sense when they've made a misstep. They just don't always know how they got there. Offering calm support instead of correction can help preserve trust and give you both a better path forward. Final thoughts. As we come to the end of this video, take a moment to reflect on what we've covered. These 5 signs, subtle memory lapses, word-finding struggles, time or place confusion, quiet withdrawal, and changes in judgment, aren't always easy to spot. They don't come all at once. They creep in gently, often disguised as simple aging or brushed off as having a rough week. But when you start seeing them repeat, that's when it's time to lean in a little closer. Dementia doesn't begin with a big announcement. It often whispers first through behaviors that seem small but carry weight. When you know what to look for, and if you're seeing any of these signs in someone you love, don't panic. Don't jump to conclusions, but do pay attention. Because early recognition gives you time to adjust, time to prepare, and most importantly, time to connect. Whether it's a spouse, a parent, or even yourself, the most valuable thing you can do in this early stage is show compassion, not just patience for the moments that don't go smoothly, but empathy for the quiet fears that come with them. Nobody wants to feel like they're slipping, but everyone wants to feel like they're not facing it alone. You don't need to be an expert to make a difference. Just a quiet presence, a familiar voice, a hand that reaches out without making anyone feel small. Those moments of dignity and understanding may matter more than any treatment or test. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share one thing you learned today and how you plan to use it in your life. Your thoughts are important to us, so don't hesitate to share them. Reading your comments gives us great motivation and encouragement. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue creating good content to inform and inspire you. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.